Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining me, astrologer Patrick Arundell, for the latest of my deep dive videos. This one is into the Autumnal Equinox, which occurs on the 22nd of September at 8:21 Universal Central Time. Now what I'm going to do is explore what this event means from an astrological viewpoint. This is the beginning of the third quadrant of the year, the cardinal quadrant. So I'm going to explain what that means. I'm then going to go on to share the event on screen, and we can see how all the different planetary influences are interacting. There's one really exciting one between the North Node in Gemini, also Saturn in Aquarius, and the Sun and Mars in Libra. So we've got a grand air trine, and that's very, very helpful and very productive, but more of that shortly. And then the third section is the zodiac sign forecast for the next 13 weeks for each of the 12 signs. So please stay with me for that. First of all, thank you so much for joining me. If you're new to my channel or me, I'd be honoured if you would subscribe. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. Then every time I launch a video, you'll get an alert for it. I've been doing YouTube for a long time. It's just I've had a lot of health issues over the years, which have kind of held back my growth a little bit. But I'm really getting into my stride again now, so it would be great to have you with me. Also, secondly, if you'd like to have your written daily horoscope fired to your device each morning, you can do so by clicking on the subscription link beneath this video. I've been writing these for 27 years. I think I'm a bit unique amongst YouTube astrologers, that my work is featured in a lot of publications around the world, and I write for Britain's most read daily newspaper, The Metro, but I also do these videos as well. So you can join me for your alerts each morning totally free. And thirdly, of course, year 2022 is racing up. If you want to get your personal forecast for next year, but you'd like to order it now, I'll give you a forecast for the rest of this year free, plus a character analysis, 30% off, based on your time, date and place of birth, totally unique to you, and this will give you seeing insights beyond your zodiac forecast. Also, this can give you some guidance in terms of the opportunities to seize, but also where you can steer clear of some potential pitfalls. So please see the link below. So the third of the big events of this year in terms of the Earth points is the autumnal equinox. The first is the vernal equinox in 0 degrees Aries, which begins the Western tropical zodiac story. And the second is the summer solstice, when the sun reaches 0 degrees in Cancer, which is all about creating the fabric of our security, physical and emotional. But again, it's a cardinal sign, just like Aries, Libra, and cardinality is about action. So that energy of Cancer is very, very powerful. But that brings us to the third of the cardinal quadrants, which will last for the next 13 weeks. And the forecast I'm giving you today is going to be the overall forecast for us all for the next 13 weeks, and then those individual zodiac sign forecasts at the end. Now, the sign of Libra is based on relating. It's an air sign. It's ruled by the planet of Venus, which is very much to do with charm and diplomacy. Libran energy can be very much linked to fashion and trends and style, aesthetics, class, very much linked to those things. But of course, relating is the big deal. And the glyph for the sign of Libra, as you know, is the scales. It's about trying to find balance. So for the next 13 weeks, we have an opportunity to work hard at our relationship situation. But that isn't necessarily about just getting what we want. It's about finding a midpoint between our interactions with others, so our closest ties feel that their needs get met as well. So it's a kind of give and take situation where we find that harmony. So that's very Libran in the energy. But of course, over recent years, Pluto working its way through the sign of Capricorn, the fourth of the cardinal signs, has been very challenging for Libran people. And so it just depends on where your planets are if you are a Libra, but certainly if they're more to the front of the sign, things should be easing for you now. But I will explain more about that shortly. But Libran energy isn't just about trying to find accords with people. It's also sometimes where we have to be competitive, where we have to reinforce our boundaries. And what's going to help this particular event hugely in that regard is that Mars is very close to the Sun. So when this event occurs, Mars is only less than 5 degrees away. So that's reinforcing the Sun, giving the relating side of things more robustness. Now, also there is the position of Mercury and the part of fortune, all in the sign of Libra. So I think the next 13 weeks is going to be a time when relationships are a big talking point for a lot of us. The other thing about Libran energy, it can be where we might want to be quite competitive, because the 7th house, which is very aligned to Libran energy, is about our open enemies, the people we know we have to compete against. It could be a rival at work, it could be a competitor if we run our own business. It may be where we want to be a bit sporty and take part in something like tennis or badminton or squash, where you have a direct opponent. That would be very much in keeping with the Libran cardinality. But please stay with me, because now on the screen I'm going to share the event wheel. And you can see there that the Sun 0 degrees in Libra, very close to Mars. But on the other side of the heavens we've got the North Node in the 1st house in Gemini. Still reversing backwards, of course that will move on the 18th, 19th of January into the sign of Taurus. But at the top of the chart we have Saturn in the 10th house. This chart is based on Greenwich, so it gives it an ascendant of 17 degrees 4 minutes in Taurus. But you can see that Saturn, the North Node, the Sun and Mars are in a grand air trine. So that's really productive. And then if we look at the houses they're in, the North Node, our instincts, the 1st house. So that's about staying true to ourselves. But the Sun, Mars, Mercury, the part of fortune, and even the ruler of the sign of Libra, Venus, which is now in Scorpio, are all in the 6th house of being very hardworking, very applied, very meticulous, and in some ways a little bit sacrificing. But they're linking up towards the position of Saturn in the 10th house, and that's very public facing, that's facing the world. Also the Sun and Pluto are in a trine. Well, it would be known as a trine in a natal chart. It's actually disassociate, so it's just 6 degrees away from being a proper trine, but very close. And again, because the Sun's in the 6th house of precision and routines and order, and Pluto, which is a very powerful influence, is right at the top of this chart, very close to the midheaven. I think we're given an opportunity over the next 3 months, to be perfectly honest, to work very hard to try and find a better balance in our lives, in our relationships, but also be thinking about our worldly situation too. So, you know, a lot of people have gone through a lot of hardship with COVID, so hopefully there's going to be some bounce back. There is some provisos that I would give with this particular chart. Although Jupiter forges a glorious link with the part of fortune and Mercury, which is very, very upbeat and brilliant for discussion of ideas and finding ways in which the 6th house is also about physical health, where that pack of planets is. So that's all good, isn't it, in terms of pushing back from COVID. And Jupiter's in the 11th house of person kind, so it's saying the more we can cooperate and collaborate, the better it's going to be for all of us in terms of getting back to some semblance of normality, even though it's likely to be some kind of new norm. But you can see that Neptune, Chiron, the Moon, and also Uranus are all in the 12th house, and that is more challenging. So I think that points towards still quite a psychological dimension ongoing to our situation. So future forwards, we might want to focus on our worldly situation. We may want to be more sociable, Jupiter in the 11th house. But I feel that there will be times that we need to heal our hearts, especially with Chiron in the 12th house. And of course the moon's there as well. So that points towards a certain amount of seclusion and reflection, and just moving back inside our situations. So if our relationships are working well, I think we probably will be more productive in terms of how we're facing out towards the world. If there are relationships that are not working well, or there's been some separations or some losses, I think there's going to still be quite a lot of processing to do from a spiritual and emotional viewpoint, and that's essentially flagged up by all those influences, but particularly Chiron, Neptune and the Moon in the 12th house. Those are very tender placements for those three. Now, in terms of your zodiac sign and also your ascendant, it just depends on how you'd like to look at things. Some people like to watch the video for both. Some like to focus just on the sun or the ascendant. But for your ascendant or sun, I'm now going to break down each of the 12 signs and tell you what your next 13 weeks is broadly going to have a flavour of. Well, Aries, for you, it's pretty self-evident that it is about relationships. But you can see that the position of the Moon is actually opposite the position of Mercury. And that's important because for you, although your ruler is very close to the Sun, Mars on the 7th house for you can actually be a bit troublesome. It can make us a bit too trenchant and strident about getting our own way. And I think it's important for you, particularly with Pluto in your solar 10th house, that you are trying to continue to build up levels of cooperation. So there's a lot to go for as far as relationships are concerned for you, but with Venus in opposition to Uranus across your 8th and 2nd houses, there could be some sudden developments around relationships, sudden infatuations, the need to have space from an existing relationship that maybe is getting a bit too cloying, and you need a degree of breathing space, and just trying to find the balance between what you're thinking and what you're feeling. And the Moon in the 1st house can be quite reactive, particularly with Chiron there as well. Your sensitivity can be heightened basically by that combination of Neptune, Chiron and the Moon. So I wouldn't jump to too many conclusions around relationship matters. And with Mars on your 7th house, good if you're needing to tackle some difficult or tricky opponents, but be careful not to push too hard to assert your point of view in an ongoing relationship, which may require you to be as flexible as the other person. Perhaps you both need to change up things a little bit in order to create a new reality. But if you're single, a single Aries, ascendant or sun, then I think having Mars on the 7th house could give you a bit more daring do when it comes to trying to reach out to somebody else. And having Mercury in that fabulous link to Jupiter suggests an introduction could be made through a friend during this next cardinal quadrant, which could be really exciting and lead to something quite special. I can't promise it would be the love of your life, but I think it would be someone you could have a real kinship with. And sometimes friendships are, so important. Now, Taurus for the sun or the ascendant, the gathering of energy in the sign of Libra, is all about practicalities. So the overview I gave for everybody is very much in keeping with you, because the ascendant on the event chart, of course, was in the sign of Taurus and very, very close to Uranus in your sign. But the midpoint on this particular event is actually in Cancer at 10 degrees, and that is in your 3rd house, and that forges a brilliant link with Venus. So the fact that Uranus is in opposition with Venus can actually still trigger something special to come into your world, but perhaps in terms of relationships it may be more in an everyday or mundane situation that you might get talking to somebody. I actually had a chat with someone recently, and they did meet a partner in a supermarket queue. So it does happen, so be open to that kind of, very mundane situation. Not so many people are necessarily going to work at the moment. There's more people working from home, but of course plenty of other people are still going to work. So it could be, you know, by the water cooler, you start chatting to somebody who started new and find that there is a kind of connection, because with having Mercury in your 6th house and Jupiter in your 10th in an absolutely sparkling alliance, you know, you can present yourself in a way that can gain their respect. Respect is very, very important. It is true, of course, that Chiron and the moon in Aries and also Neptune in this particular event chart in the 12th house, but in your solar chart it does mean the moon and Chiron are in your 12th house too, which could make you a little bit more timid, I guess. It could make you feel a bit more sensitive about relationship issues. If you're in an ongoing relationship, I definitely feel that there needs to be a fair share of the domestic load between you and yours. And if that isn't the case, and you're just the one who always takes on the lion's share of the responsibility, that's the thing you need to push back against with Mars's help in that conjunction with the Sun. So have the confidence to do that, to get a fairer share. However, if you're in an ongoing relationship, which is pretty good in that regard, but has got into a little bit of a predictable pattern, which they all can do, try to do something really seriously spontaneous. I think, you know, go to somewhere that you've never visited before, even if it's only 3 or 4 miles up the road. Just do something different. It could be really enlivening for the time. Now, Gemini, for your sun sign or ascendant, of course you've got that glorious stellium of energy in Libra in your 5th house of life's pleasures and self-expression, and even the moon and Chiron are in your 11th house of friendships, and you have Jupiter and Saturn in the 9th house of expansion. Now, Gemini, you've taken quite a lot of pressure this year, I feel, with that Uranus-Saturn square, because that's been amplified, as I've said before, by Saturn being in your 9th house. We know that Saturn is mainly about retraction, but I feel the 9th house expands. And then, of course, Uranus has been in your 12th house of the psyche. And Gemini people like to use your mind. You know, you're someone who likes to discuss things and works things out intellectually. So having having Uranus in your 12th house has perhaps affected your nervous system quite a lot this year. So the good news is the next 3 months, I think, for you can be one heck of a lot brighter. And I'm really delighted to share that with you. And that wonderful grand air trine between the North Node in your sign, the Sun, Mars in your 5th house, and Saturn in the 9th house suggests if you're starting something that's creative and a bit different, you can find the right mix of application but inspiration. You can listen to your instincts and go for it. And I think this is a much better period shaping up for you. So really delighted to be able to share that with you. Now, Cancer, for your sun or ascendant, of course, the midpoint for this event is actually in your sign. So you could argue that as the autumn equinox occurs, it has a kind of Cancerian feel, but on the Greenwich Mean Time location, it does mean that's in the 3rd house, that midpoint. So communication, and therefore a lot of action about where you live, who you live with, how you live there. Are you satisfied in your immediate environment? If you're not, you could get itchy feet for sure. And this chart gives you an enormous opportunity to manifest what you really, really want to achieve. It gives you the determination and the flair. The North Node being in your 12th solar house is asking you to listen to your deepest gut instincts about what to do. But there really is a great opportunity with Jupiter collaborating so well with Mercury and Saturn collaborating so well with the Sun, Mars and the North Node for you to listen to your gut instinct, but then to act out what you want to achieve. Mars in the 4th house can be a bit defensive. It's a bit like having Cancer in your sign. It can be, you know, a bit gnarly, but I think it will give you the motivation. So if you're staying where you are, but it's not quite as you want, this will give you the drive to adapt it. You know, put that new bathroom suite in, or decorate. If you're wanting to move to somewhere different, your drive to achieve that can be enormous over this next 13 weeks. So really exciting stuff. And of course, in terms of romance, having Venus and Uranus linking so perfectly well with the midpoint in your sign suggests that, chat to people. The fourth house energy can be quite guarded. And as I said before, having Mars there, almost defensive. But I think Venus, Uranus and the midpoint are saying to you, as long as you feel safe with someone, this may be a good time to actually open up a little bit, because you might find that you have an accord with someone, a simpatico, that you might miss out on by staying resolutely nailed down, which can be a bit of a Cancer trait, protecting yourself to such a degree that you're not interacting. And, but there's a lot of emotion going on under that bonnet of that crab shell. So lift the bonnet and let that emotion out is what I'd say to you. Now, Leo, for you, for the sun or the ascendant, of course, on this particular chart, the ascendant is in your 10th house and Uranus is right on it. So that points towards continuing to be very open-minded about the type of work you can do. With the cluster of energy in the sign of Libra, you need to use your mind. And if you are someone who's been in a job for some while, because essentially you're a fixed sign, and even though you have this reputation of having a dazzling, charismatic personality, it's amazing how many Leos can be quite timid about making changes, particularly on one's own. Making changes in a partnership, that's fine. Making changes on your own can be more challenging. So this chart gives you a fantastic opportunity to change up things, change your thinking around relationships, the people that you can interact with. Perhaps that could be colleagues, it may be in a more personal context, but a lot of talking and a lot of thinking is going to go on over the next 13 weeks and a lot of excitement. But I think for a lot of Leos, a change is coming in terms of where you work, how you work there, or who with, or perhaps you're even going to think about doing something for yourself. And there may be some retraining that's going to go on, or if you've got skills, you may be someone who wants to share those skills through the medium of a blog or a PDF or a book or videos. Some kind of oration may be part of the message for you to raise your profile in some way. But this chart suggests that other people can be more receptive towards you than they have so far this year. I think at times this year you felt that people haven't liked you very much, and that's because Saturn is in your 7th house, and that is tough. That's a tough location for Saturn to be. And of course Uranus is in your 10th house, so it may have been difficult for some people to disguise how they feel towards you, and that may have been a bit alarming, because you do need a degree of approval. Certainly, you don't necessarily expect everyone to like you, but you do want everyone to respect you. And if that's been in short supply this year, I think the next 3 months gives you an opportunity to really shine in the way that you're much more used to doing. So go for it. Which brings us to the sun or the ascendant for Virgo. Now, for you, there's a plethora of energies in your 2nd house, which is all about resources and self-worth. And then you've got Saturn and also Jupiter in your personal solar 6th house. That's to do with work and application. So if you work hard, you concentrate on the details, Saturn, something you have a natural gift for, there's an awful lot to go for. It just suggests that with the moon being so close to Chiron in your personal 8th house, some big emotional changes can be triggered as well, perhaps even in terms of where you live, because the moon can be about the home, of course, but the moon's in opposition with Mercury. So I think there could be some big discussions about your values and the values of someone that you're involved with. For example, you may have to deal with people who see things very differently to you, but at the same time you're trying to build up your foundation in your world and yet change it. Why is it that we have this paradox? Well, it's simply in this chart for the next 13 weeks, you're wanting the foundations, the basis of your life to be firm and stable, but Uranus in your 9th house is pushing you to be more daring. And because the moon position on this particular chart points towards some transformation. I think it's going to be difficult for you to resist the fact that some changes are coming. And the moon does square up with Pluto on this particular event. And that means there could be some, maybe ups and downs in terms of a relationship, because you've got Pluto in the 5th house of romance. Some hot and heavy scenes. Maybe someone is resisting what you're trying to do to create the new reality that's important to you. And Uranus is pushing you to be more daring than perhaps you've ever been before, but you have got that counterpoint, which is asking you to really get the foundations right. So there's a conflict really there that you need to find the way through. Now Libra, of course for you, this event is marvellous. The sun moving into the sign of Libra will give you a lot more conviction. You'll feel that you're in the moment a lot more. You'll feel much more energized. Some of the difficulties and troubles that have been inflicted upon you since 2008, when Pluto first went into your 4th house and then was amplified by Saturn and Jupiter going through Capricorn a couple of years ago, well, that's all easing, but we can't change the fact that in this particular event, Mercury is squaring with Pluto. So there could still be somebody close to you in terms of a property matter, in terms of a family point of view, that's still needling you a little bit. But if you can work on the parts of your situation with this event to your best of your ability, the fact that the North Node is in a wonderful location for you, it's about expansion. The Sun and Mars are giving you a sense of conviction and certainty and drive and thrust in your sign. Mercury may be challenged by Pluto, but it's in that amazing sparkling link with Jupiter. And Jupiter is about knowledge, and it's about growth, and it's in your 5th house of life's joys. For sure Saturn's there, but that doesn't mean to say you can't have joys. It just means you've got to work very, very hard. And so if you have a talent that you're not using, and you have been working in an environment where you feel you've been to some degree giving your power away, and you're really liking the idea of creating something that's much more individually based on your unique talents, your ability as a relator, as a diplomat. Sometimes when you have to deliver a difficult truth inside that velvet glove, you can be quite tough. You are a cardinal sign once you get your fire up, but you can spend far too much time people pleasing. So I think this chart is saying forget the people pleasing and focus on pleasing yourself. And if there's anything remotely creative, romantic or fun that you can dive into over the next 3 months, go for it with all your being. Now, Scorpio for your sun or your ascendant. Now, of course, we have Venus in your sign. Lovely, loads of attention. You have that pack of planets in your 12th house, and that's really difficult, potentially, because 12th house energy can be about reflection. But the big one there, I think, is Mercury being in the 12th house, squaring up with Pluto. So some information may come into the open over the next 13 weeks, which surprises you. It may be that something's been discussed, not necessarily behind your back, but something that has been kept confidential but does affect you. It may not just affect you, it may affect others, and suddenly it becomes public knowledge. And it could be quite annoying that a lot was going on without you knowing. But just remember, your traditional ruler in the 12th house can also stir up a lot of memories for you. And some of those memories may be to do with past hurts, past upsets, past defeats. And Mars in the 12th house can be a pretty tricky customer to deal with. But it's also an opportunity, as all tricky planetary transits can be, for you to come to terms with some of those more difficult or thorny experiences in your life. Now, some of them may have been so painful, it may not be completely possible to put them absolutely to bed, but maybe you can revisit them and just very gently lift up the onion skin and just let a bit of air in, get a bit more perspective around things, discuss things with a confidential confidence, with someone you can really trust, and that could be a very healing process for you. You do have Saturn and Jupiter in your 4th house, So something around home, emotions, maybe in the works. And Uranus, of course, is on your 7th house cusp, opposite Venus in your sign. So something that maybe has been grumbling along for quite some time, that's a bit awkward, a bit difficult, something that you might not want to talk about because, you know, you can be quite private about your own personal stuff. Maybe there's something you haven't been particularly happy about. And I think this chart points towards you trying to embrace those rather sensitive strands and really looking at them in a fundamental way. And I think it could be very healing to do so. I'm sorry that's not tremendously glamorous, but you still have Venus in your own sign, and all that 12th house energy may point towards a hidden admirer showing their hands over the next 13 weeks. So it's not all inward. It can be exciting, but I think there is quite a psychological dimension to your situation, just being really honest with you. Now, Sagittarius, for your sun or your ascendant, having all these planets in Libra is just marvellous for you because it's all about sociability. You're one of the most sociable signs. Of course, it depends in your unique natal chart whether you've got some inner planets in Scorpio, and that may make you a more reflective or spiritual type of Sagittarius. But if you're someone who enjoys having Venus and Mercury in your natal horoscope, you probably are very, very bubbly. And having this collection of energies in the sign of Libra, this stellium, is very, very good to revive your social life. Having Jupiter in your 3rd house of bubbly interactions, text messages, emails, chit-chat, sharing gossip, having a bit of a laugh. Saturn's there as well, which, sure, that can mean there's going to be some serious conversations as well, but it's anchoring brilliantly both Mars, the Sun, and the North Node. So the North Node's in your sector of relationships. So there could be a friendship that will become much closer and deeper for you over the next 3 months. Maybe even someone new and special will come into your world because you do have the moon in your 5th house, which is very warm and affectionate. But with Uranus in the 6th house, anything to do with practicalities, work and health may require continual refinements. You also have Pluto in the 2nd house of money, and that is squaring with the moon in your 5th house. So there could be some expenditure around your desire to interact more with other people. But because you can be one of the most hale and hearty members of the Zodiac, I think COVID and the lockdown of COVID has probably been as hard for your sign as any other. So a chance to reconnect with your friends, if it's possible in your locality, go out to watch some bands or meet people for a drink or something to eat, and all that stuff is just going to be mannered to you over the next 13 weeks. So enjoy. Now that brings us to Capricorn for the Sun or the Ascendant. Now for you, the success part of your chart, the 10th house, is absolutely rammed with possibilities and positivity. And it also links brilliantly with the 2nd house, which is to do with money. Now, of course, both Saturn and Jupiter, Saturn the planet of retraction, Jupiter the planet of expansion, are in retrograde and have been for some time. The good news is in October, they're both going to be going forwards. So if money's been a bit pinched for you, or you've been waiting for money to come in, the great news is a much better period of time is going to start to develop for you from the 11th and the 18th of October, when Saturn and Jupiter respectively start to go forwards. But this chart is saying the harder you work, the better you can do. It's just also saying with Uranus where it is, you know, try to give yourself the permission to break out of any sort of premise of approaching things in a certain way. You know, we all have influences when we're younger, and you know, because natal astrology is very complex, you could be a Capricorn who's been a little bit edgy your whole life. You know, it just depends where your natal horoscope influences things. But a lot of the Capricorns will go for safety first and be very applied, thorough, systematic, hardworking, very, very hardworking and dedicated. And that's great. But don't, in terms of chasing your goals and aspirations, let your desire for physical success or status or money pulverize your passion, because you could get to a goal over the next 3 months and actually it could end up being a bit of an empty victory. So it's very, very important that what you do, you enjoy. It gives you a sense of fulfillment and enjoyment. And if you are in a job which is successful and you can see it can continue to be successful, and you're not having to think of others like, you know, children and all the rest of it, you're a freer spirit at the moment, you know, be open-minded about the type of job opportunities that you can pursue. If you are needing to be a bit more mindful of your responsibilities, your social situation, your hobbies and interests, those can be the areas that Uranus gives you permission to be a bit more zany, do some stuff off the cuff. It really will be like a breath of fresh air. But if you're wanting to aim for the stars, there's every chance by the time the sun reaches your sign on the winter solstice that you will have really had some radical advancement in your situation, which will delight you. Now, Aquarius. Aquarius, for you, the gathering of energy in the sign of Libra is very much about expansion. It's about travel. It's about widening your horizons. All the things that have been very, very difficult to do for a lot of us during the whole COVID situation. But if there's one way or another that you can find a way to shake things up and be more spontaneous, more varied in your approach, this chart really speaks to that. So over the next 3 months, my prediction is, whether it's the sun or the ascendant, you're going to be on the move in your mind, on the move in terms of where you live, on the move in terms of traveling for your work, on the move in terms of a vacation, on the move in terms of pursuing enjoyment. So a lot more activity. You may even find yourself doing some more physical activity, more rugged activity, because of Mars being so close to the sun. But with Saturn in that wonderful grand air trine with the North Node, the Sun and Mars, this really gives every one of the three air signs of Gemini, Libra and Aquarius, this particular event gives you enormous possibilities to break out and be much more abandoned. It is true, Mercury squaring Pluto, possibly a legalistic matter could come up and cause some concerns, or something about a contract. But with Mercury also in a terrific angle with Jupiter, I feel that it may turn out better than you fear. And I think generally speaking, this particular event has got so many good elements to it from your perspective. It's an opportunity for you to really manifest yourself as an individual, but in a much more daring way. You know, because you do have the co-rulership of Saturn of your sign, us Aquarius people can be, you know, have a bit of a duality. There is the more novel, nutty, I'm only speaking for myself, sorry, I'm not trying to smear you as a fellow Aquarius, but do you know what I'm saying? There's that side that can be a bit unpredictable and fun and be interested in very unusual things, but then there's the other side that can be very much into maintaining the status quo and being very connected to traditions in the past. And I think this chart is just saying, you know, honour all those things, but give yourself permission to do something different. It really will be great. And that brings us to Pisces, last of the 12 zodiac signs, of course, but very, very important. And for you, Pisces, for the sun or the ascendant, having Saturn in your 12th house, I can only be honest, is potentially quite grueling. And once it gets into your sign, obviously, you know, people will say that once Saturn moves into our own zodiac sign, particularly when it meets exactly on the sun, it can be very limiting. But I think when it goes through the 12th house, that's very limiting psychologically. Now, Jupiter, your co-ruler, is in the 12th house of your particular solar chart, but forging a great link to Mercury. And therefore, ideas that you've had perhaps bubbling around in the back of your situation for some while, perhaps of a business or entrepreneurial nature, they really could start to take shape in a very positive way. Uranus continues to give you a lot of desire to make your life more stimulating, But in turn, you either have that sense of zest and excitement one minute, and the next minute you're asleep on the sofa, because Uranus in the third house really affects the nervous system. And of course, because of the broad square we've had with Saturn this year, Saturn being in the 12th house, that probably really has been quite challenging in terms of your nervous system at times. But generally, this chart is very good for you, I feel. The fact that Venus and Uranus are in an opposition suggests be open-minded about the communications that can come in for you. Something could happen suddenly. The midpoint of this event is also in your 5th house. That's about joys. It's just that, you know, the 8th house is about transformations, and that may mean challenging yourself as much as anyone else. Transformations away from something we know into something different is potentially quite scary, particularly if we have to give up something in order to potentially get something that we don't know will work out for us or not. So something needs to transform, and I think if your life does feel that, you know, it's 2 work a day and you're not getting enough emotional or even playful sustenance, this particular event over the next 3 months is really saying, have a good think about how you can change things. I think anything to do with healing or having some counselling, investigating personal development, all those things can be very enriching for all of us all of the time. But I think for you at the moment, those are areas that could be really wonderfully uplifting for you, very reinforcing. So sometimes in order to really engage with things like that, we have to accept our vulnerabilities. And some people aren't very good at doing that. Other people are. If you're someone who does have quite a lot of pride, don't see it as a weakness if you start exploring what makes you tick, what makes you feel fearful, what makes you feel anxious or uncertain. Because once you start to do that, you're actually beginning to create the strategy to liberate yourself from the latent energy that they create, which is like a trap. Almost like you imagine the 10 of swords in the tarot, where, you know, we can't sleep. It's really, we can't think of how it can get any worse because we just feel utterly beaten up and betrayed. Now, because you've got Saturn in the 12th house and all these planets in the 8th house, if that, you know, rings or chimes for you in any way at all, that perhaps there are people around you that have been very disappointing, how can you move from that disappointment? Well, the best way to move from it is by processing the disappointment. If you just sit with it, it will make you feel hugely lethargic and not very happy. But if you can start to accept that that's how you feel, and that means putting the pride to one side, you're halfway to actually really moving forwards. And this could be a time of enormous personal growth over the next 3 months. And as I say, I think you could also meet someone or connect to someone who also is on a journey themselves of discovery, and it could turn out to be the most meaningful relationship you've ever had in your whole life. That completes the 12 zodiac sign, sun and ascendant forecast, and my in-depth deep dive for the autumnal equinox. Thank you so much for joining me. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, but for now, take care and goodbye.